Good afternoon to everybody. It's very good to be here, learning with my colleagues from different emerging markets. And learning with you and having the opportunity to discuss with you this the regulation in Brazil. I have to make some clarifications initially about the fires in Brazil. The forest fires, they are happening, but not in extension. They are saying they are partly a natural phenomenon, and the press movement about that is created by other interests, maybe. About the corruption, we don't have this in Brazil. It's a joke, but we are doing some good work to reduce that. About samba and carnival, we really have them, and they are definitely very good. I have to say that. We also have some tequila there imported from Mexico. And basically, Brazil, it's just a big picture before I come to the details I'm going to discuss here. Brazil is not big as China or India, and we know that. So we can't, we have to be worried about the limitations and the problems we create to foreign investors. I think we are learning with that because we made some mistakes recently in the past, and now we are trying to be more business friendly, much more business friendly. It's an effort that is already happening, but today we are 100% open to the foreign capital. We don't have any limitation. So if a foreign investor intends to incorporate an insurance company in Brazil, it's absolutely fine, no problem. It's a fast process. It's relatively simple, common sense. It doesn't change a lot comparing with other countries in the world. Basically, have to show who you are, which group we are talking about, and what are your plans. And based on that, you probably have your license in less than 6 months, at least if our law firm is taking care of the process. And in the reinsurance, we have some limitations. When I was the supervisor, some companies were used to complain, we have to open the market. And I always mentioned India. I said, no, look to India. We are open. And they said, no, come on, you are joking. You can't compare with India at that time. So India is much more open now. But we have basically a first refusal right on 40% of the risk. So there's a first refusal right to part of the risk, and 60% of the risk you can freely place abroad with registered reinsurers. We have some registration rules, but they are also not a big problem. About the Brazilian economy, our perspectives are very good, very, very good. Our new government mentioned and is implementing reforms to limit its expenses, which is a big problem to us. We have pension. We are the only country in the world that is so young and with a so big problem in the pension side, because our pension system it's unacceptable, and it's probably going to be reformed. The final approval is going to happen in the next weeks. So it's maybe the biggest issue in the country at this moment. And the government is also intending to reduce the participation of the state and of the government in the life of the persons and of the companies. So we can hope that things are going to be better, and they are, as I will show. The perspectives are being implemented. Obviously, the economic impacts, the numbers will change in the future, from the next year to the future. But it's already happening. We are trying to do that. Sometimes because we have and maybe the easiest comparison is United States with Trump. I'm not saying I'm a fan or against Trump, but I'm saying that we have two sides, and one side is always exaggerating the other side bad things and exaggerating their own good things, and there is not a very structured middle. So we lost this in the last election, and because of that we have a lot of noise, a lot of disputes in a transition period from the left government we had and a more business friendly government that we are going to have, that we already have, that we will implement some changes. So because of that, sometimes it's difficult to have the clear perspective about what's happening, because it's we still have to see the things happening, but they are happening. So we have some objective elements in this regard. We are going to have the pensions reform. With the pensions reform, the government will be back to the game, to the investment game. Not the investment in anything, but the infrastructure investment, because the government doesn't have money to do that at this point. So when the government starts again to participate in the infrastructure projects, big infrastructure projects, it's probably, and the government will have money to do that, because the pensions reform, including other reforms, probably we are going to have a lot of movement in Brazil about guarantees and insurance associated to big infrastructure projects. It's going to happen next year. We are probably going to start to listen about that in the end of this year. We are already in the end of this year, but in the next months, we are going to listen about some projects. And next year, probably it's going to be very frequent. We are going to very frequently hear about privatization projects in Brazil. They are being launched, prepared in the last months, and some of them are happening. For example, the IRB, the state-owned reinsurer in Brazil, part of the shares were already sold by the government. There is a state-owned insurance company. It's a long history, but I don't know why it exists. And fortunately, it's going to be closed. It's already mentioned. It's officially in the program of the government. So we believe that pensions reform will be very good to the infrastructure, and will, together with some privatization, will make the economic environment much better. The tax system in Brazil is a nightmare. It's probably the worst tax system in the world, and it's a joke. It's very bad, and there's a strong consensus about that. And fortunately, the president of the lower chamber and the president of the federal senate and the president of the country, they are disputing the leadership of the tax reform. So the good news is that probably we are going to have a tax reform being approved in the beginning of the next year, or in the end of this year. As I said, the privatization program is something that has to be discussed carefully. There is a lot of resistance in certain sectors of the country. The population doesn't understand 100% of what it means, but the fact is that it's already happening. So it's one more reform that will open more space in the government to invest in infrastructure, and will save time to everybody, and will make the country more efficient, because governments are never efficient. So there's not a solution to that. You can't solve this. Civil servants can't be fired because the boss doesn't like them. How do you solve that? You limit this inefficiency to the minimum necessary. The bureaucracy, public systems, health system, maybe education, and that's it. You don't do anything more, because it's genetically inefficient. And the privatization is a very strong process. There is a decision of this government to not be bigger than the previous government. And this is different than everything we have seen in the last 20 years. We have an economic freedom law recently issued. I know that to an European analyst, it's obvious that before any regulatory intervention, you have to measure the impact of what's going to happen. And it happens here. Aldo mentioned that the Solvency II was implemented in Mexico before that, then it was implemented in Brazil. It also happened with Brazil. We had the pen. We just decided to create the risk-based capital, and etc. and etc. In Europe, it's much more difficult because Europe is on its benefit. Europe is used to discuss the impacts carefully and take some time to implement anything. In Brazil, it was not the general rule. So now there's a law imposing the obligation of to measure impacts before you implement any regulatory intervention. We had two opportunities already to remind the regulator that no, you can't do that because there's a law now prohibiting you. So it's already happening. We have the Mercosur and the free trade agreement between Mercosur and Europe. Maybe, I'm not saying that I'm sure about that, but maybe the forest fire problem that was part of the discuss with Macron is associated with some agriculture requests from France, and they want to create problems to implement the free trade agreement in Europe because our agriculture is very efficient. I'm just saying that what our president said, but it's because they are fighting in the international press, and on the basis of this is not the wife of Macron, is not the forest fire, is the fact that we have a free trade agreement and France is trying to protect some agricultures. It's what's happening. I'm not saying the fire doesn't exist, just for what you said. The regulatory environment, we don't have a structured program of debureaucratization of the regulation and of the government. But it's clear that the leaders of the process, the superintendent of SUSEP, the number one at SUSEP, is a person that is 100% aligned with the position of the government to reduce the bureaucracy, to rediscuss consensus about bureaucratic proceedings. So it's clear that they are aligned. We can expect, and this speech is very good because this speech creates the obligation not only creates not only the perspective of change, but it obligates, it links, it becomes to stay linked with the supervisor practice. Because last week you said you were going to reduce the bureaucracy, so you can't do that, and it makes sense. So it's working. We see in the regulatory environment some changes already happening, and it's fascinating what's happening with the insurance market in Brazil. We had the opening of the reinsurance market in 2007 more exactly. 2008, the market was in fact open with all the regulation in place and etc. Since then, we are watching a process of reaccommodation of the players in the Brazilian market, because with the reinsurance opened, the global players are specializing in large risks, and the local players that are very strong in Brazil, they are being specialized in personal insurance and small risks in general. Because the local players, they are controlled as a general rule by banks that are very strong in Brazil. And banks don't like very large risks. It doesn't make sense to them. If you want to play this game, you have to be an insurer, not a bank trying to make some money, because they don't like the big claims, obviously. So what's happening is that we are seeing a change in the environment, because a lot of global groups, global insurance groups, are acquiring operations of large risks of some local companies in Brazil. And more than that, they are occupying the space. Because in the insurance, you don't have to necessarily to sell your operation. You have just to hire the management. And then in 12 months, all the risks are changing the place. They are, when they in the renewal period, they are renewing in the new insurance company. So basically what's happening in the last years is that the global players, they are occupying the space of the large risks because of the Solvency II changes, our risk-based capital. It became more expensive to deal with large risks because of the opening of the reinsurance market, mostly because of that, and because the economy is being more sophisticated, in fact. So it's a changing environment. It's changing every day. And every day we see, I mentioned here some operations about regarding Itaú, ACE, and Chubb. It was a big operation, local operation, bought by ACE and after merged with Chubb. Bradesco, that is the largest insurance company, has now a joint venture with Swiss Re. SulAmérica, a former very large, a company that was very large in all the risks for a long time, 20 years ago. It was the second largest, disputing with Bradesco, sold all the large risks, and now the automobile business to AXA. SulAmérica and automobile insurance to Allianz. Larger risks to AXA. They stayed only with life insurance. IRB and Caixa. Caixa is a local state-owned insurer. They are negotiating a partnership with IRB. Austral and Terra Brasis, they are two companies that are merging to stay one, two local reinsurers. So what we see is a big change in the local environment that is a result of a lot of changes in the regulatory environment. We have, as I said, some regulatory good news. We had a data privacy law published, recently published, and it will be effective in the next year. Just for your information, we didn't have a data privacy law. Anyone. It was something very difficult to explain to our foreign clients. In the first answer, all them, 100% said, okay, but please explain me. Right? They almost were not trusting us about our answer because we have the civil code, we have the constitution, we have the consumer protection code, and we have some rules here. No, I want the data privacy law. We didn't have one. So it's a very usual mistake in Brazil to see our data privacy law that is very similar to the GDPR. Our data privacy law was urgent because of the GDPR, because of the necessity of this correspondence. And it's a very usual mistake to underestimate or to overestimate the impacts of the data privacy law based on this. We created our data privacy law as the law that was going to take care of the digital information. So there's a lot of confusion about that. It's a data privacy law. That's it. That obviously at this moment, if it was issued at this moment, it will take care of the digital information, digital operations, and everything. We had in the regulatory side also the liberalization of mandatory brokerage in some points. It's a very sensitive issue, and here it will not impact hugely. It will not have a huge impact in the insurance market, but it's a very important sign about the fact that this supervisor, this regulator, is not worried about political consensus, about market consensus. Because to fight against brokerage, I don't know the reason why, but in all the countries in the world, brokers are very, very well organized. The fact is that to fight against this, you need a lot of courage. When I was in the supervision, we started a public hearing about the transparency, the disclosure of the brokerage commissions. They made public my email address and said, hey, they want to finish with your money. They want to cut your revenues. If you want to complain, you send a message to this guy here. It was like this. So this superintendent is really facing some consensus. It's a very good sign of that. We had a new rule about pay-per-use insurance. It should be simple and it should be easy. But in Brazil, to talk about that, to create a rule about that, and to issue a rule authorizing this kind of insurance is a big step. So we are seeing that things are happening. We had three public hearing discussions. One about the transparency of the insurance intermediation, not about brokerage, about intermediation in general. So they will have to be much more transparent regarding conflict of interest and about brokerage. I don't have to talk about that a long time. It's a very sensitive issue, and it's a very ambitious public hearing. So it shows how we are going ahead in the process to have a better market. We have a public hearing to discuss a new rule allowing pension funds to contract reinsurance directly. Pension funds in Brazil now, if they want to transfer risks, they have to look for an insurance company, and then if the insurance company is interested, it will place the risk with reinsurers. And now, because of for a long time, this possibility was discussed but not implemented, and because of some work of the Reinsurers Association discussing this issue with the regulator, we managed to obtain a decision of SUSEP to allow the pension funds to buy reinsurance directly, which is very good, not because there is a reinsurance market, but at least because the insurance companies will have to run and to offer something, or they will lose space to the reinsurers. We had another public hearing to discuss the regulatory sandbox. I personally don't like the idea of a sandbox as it was launched, created, and I don't know all. I'm not specialized in the UK market, but as far as I understand, as it was launched in some countries like UK, Singapore, and others, because the sandbox, it's as the name suggests, is someone that's taking care with the children in the sandbox. And I'm not a children. I'm not a child. I don't need the sandbox. And the sandbox has a lot of other problems, because a sandbox will provide specific and limited authorization to insurtechs, but the regulator is not prepared to manage the innovation. So the regulator will limit the innovation to the, 50 companies that will manage to be authorized by the sandbox, and the other ones. So it doesn't make sense to me. Legally, we have thousands of problems because of that. Why choose my company and not the other one? And in the digital era, in the digital times, the winner takes everything. So they will choose the winner. It doesn't make sense to me. In Brazil, and I had the opportunity to discuss that as member of the innovation committee of the supervisor, as a president of the academy, we had a position there. This commission doesn't exist anymore. But I had the opportunity to discuss that, to say, no, sandbox is a big mistake. And but they are doing something very interesting. The Brazilian, the sandbox that they are intending to create is a sandbox only to insurance companies, not to insurtechs. What they say is the incumbent will take care of the insurtechs, the claims handling company, the underwriting company. It's not my problem. There is an incumbent. That's what I need. I don't want to approve claims handling processes. It doesn't make sense. What they will work in the sandbox is they are intending to provide specific authorizations to insurance companies. So you can have smaller operations in specific areas. It's not defined. It depends on you. It can be the part of the state of São Paulo, one small city, a small medium city, whatever. And they will reduce the capital, and they will authorize that this operation is initiated with a smaller capital and with a different structure, corporate governance structure. And after some years, this is the proposal. After some years, you have to become an adult So you're going to have to sell your operation, or to become a real complete, full insurance company. So the project is very well designed, and it's a merit of the SUSEP's team in this case, because they spent a long time discussing this. They traveled to London. They had some discussions in London with the people from FSA and the other supervisor, that's PRA, right? Discussing everything. So it's a merit of them. They did a very good job. At least the suggestion needs some adjustments, the proposed rule, but the plan is very good. So we have good perspectives in the large risks because of the infrastructure projects, because of the fact that we are going to be back to the economic GDP growth, probably. So in the large risk, we have good perspectives. In the regulatory side, we have good perspectives, because we are going to try to not create more problems and to reduce the level of problems that we already present to our investors. And in the general insurance, in the personal lines, we probably are going to see a supervisor much more friendly and much more open to new products that are being developed in all the world, and there's no reason to stay out of this process. So we have some very good regulatory news, but I have to be honest, we have some bad news. We had very recently a ruling issued by SUSEP about embargoes and sanctions clause. It was a nightmare. They didn't have a brief idea about this subject, and created a big problem. Basically, they're saying that they are making impossible to the companies to have effective and functional embargoes and sanctions clauses. Fortunately, there is a work that is being conducted. Our law firm is working with the Reinsurers Association, that is kind of leading this, even considering the Insurers Association, because it's mostly a global problem. It's a problem to global companies, and now it's suspended, and we are discussing solutions and to address the issues that SUSEP was trying to take care when they issued the first rule. So, but it was a big mistake, unnecessary, and resulted from, I would say that they are very ambitious on doing things as fast as possible, because they want to be effective. So, but sometimes it's not very good to be that fast. And we have a big discussion about the registration of insurance contracts and reinsurance contracts. Our regulator, our supervisor, is inspired by the central bank. The central bank in Brazil, the financial system supervisor, they are very good. They are really, really very good. The registration of the operations in the financial system is very well done. This is something that the Brazilians, the informed Brazilians, are proud of. But the fact is that inspired by that, they are trying to implement something similar to in the insurance market. And they made a big mess, because they are thinking that basically that if I have all the insurances registered and all the reinsurances registered, in the end of the day, I will put one in the side of the other one, and it will make a lot of sense. Okay, 100 was transferred and 100 was accepted. It doesn't make sense. We have thousands of different reinsurance contracts, and the timing is different, so they will never make sense. It's just a wrong decision. And the problem here is that it's a very expensive project. So but the problem here is also the fact that SUSEP loves this project. So we hope that maybe they will learn that it's wrong, they will find a different way, at least reducing the necessity of registration to most important, to some lines like surety, some important lines that where to which the registration will make a bit more sense. But basically, the overall conclusion, the overall result is that we are seeing that we have a new mindset of to the intention of making things simpler, easier, to create the intention to create a more open market, the intention to make Brazil a more business-friendly country, and probably a new government will face problems with the lack of experience and some inefficiency of the market to discuss some issues. But basically, we are very optimistic about the future. Thank you.